We are demanding an emergency program to provide employment for everyone in need of a job, or if a work program is impractical, a guaranteed annual income at levels that sustain life in decent circumstances. It is now incontestable that the wealth and resources of the United States make the elimination of poverty absolutely practical.
Lost your white-collar job to downsizing or to a worker in India or China, you're most likely a victim of what economists have called technological unemployment. There's a lot of it going around.
Because they're cutting their payrolls. I mean, payrolls are one of their biggest costs, and if they can cut their payrolls and ship the jobs abroad or replace the jobs with automated machinery or the internet or software, that means more money for the corporation and higher profits. And that's exactly what's happening. Jobs are really not coming back at the rate that they should be coming back, largely because these corporations basically want to make more money.
Well, it's the elimination of jobs or the replacement of employment of people by advancing technologies or new technologies of various kinds.
It's not something that's just happening instantly right now. It's been going on for some time. Over the past couple of decades, at least what we've seen is that the wages for average workers have basically been stagnant in spite of the fact that we've seen significant increases in productivity. And basically, all the fruits of innovation and of productivity are really going to business owners and to management at this point, and very little to labor. And I think automation has a lot to do with that.
We may be on some kind of cusp of a real change. And if that is true, then we need to start thinking about what the implications of that are. I mean, for example, if you take driving, say. Now, of course, we're not going to see self-driving cars on our roads anytime, immediately, of course, because it would require lots of changes in all kinds of areas. But one can see the directions in which it will travel. For example, we could easily get to a situation where, in say 5 years' time, or perhaps 10, where self-driving cars are now an accepted self-driving vehicles are an accepted kind of component of our transportation system, and then you find that if you have a car and you like driving, then you'll find that your insurance company is going to say, well, you're going to drive this car yourself? Okay, well then your premium is £1,700 a year. Okay, if you just leave it drive yourself, then it'll be 200, because the cars are much safer. Okay, now those kind of pressures are very powerful, and they will eventually have an effect.
Well, it means that the machines are increasingly taking on cognitive tasks. I mean, they can solve intellectual problems, they can think in some sense, they can make decisions, they can solve problems. I think it's important to understand the point that I think most jobs in the economy are to some extent routine and fairly narrow. I mean, people get paid to do fairly specific things. I mean, you may be a very well-rounded human being and there may be a lot of things that you can do that are well beyond the capability of any machine, but typically that's not what you get paid for. You get paid to go to work and you tend to face the same types of challenges again and again within some relatively narrowly defined range. And as these technologies get better, they're going to be able to take on more and more of that. One of the really potentially disruptive things, I think, is going to be machine learning, which is a technology where software looks at what's been done in the past in terms of how a job was performed, and then basically figures out how to do it in the future. Basically writes its own program based on looking at that data.
If a problem can be solved using massive computing power, then you can consider it solved. You don't have to think about it. It isn't an if, it's simply a when. And that's the the kind of key dynamic of this. And most people, as far as I can see, have no concept of what this means.
Do you think there'd be enough pressure created by technological unemployment to make governments and political systems change and be more proactive or reactive?
Well, the question then is how does political and social change happen? And one gloomy answer to that is that it only happens when things get to be unbearable. Okay, it only happens when you have half the population unemployed, long-term unemployed, and eventually somebody's going to say, "To hell with this." But the problem with that is that you then have an explosion of some rage and that's the consequences of that might be just as unpleasant as the thing. That's not the way to do it. Unfortunately, it's often the way that human societies have changed. They've waited and waited and waited until the pressure built, and then there's an explosion, and then afterwards, what happens might not be any much better. It just might be, that's not the way to do it. We could be intelligent about this. We could think ahead. We could say this is what we need to be doing. We could talk about what is likely to happen. We could think about the need to change our taxation systems so that the wealth generated by this technology is more equitably distributed. We could make sure that the companies that control it are A, controlled by democracies, and B, pay their taxes. We could do all of that stuff, but this is all politics in the end. It isn't about technology, it's all about politics.
There's no choice but to fund that through more progressive taxation on the wealthiest people who are really benefiting from this trend. And they're benefiting in large measure because they're in the right place at the right time. They're here at this moment, and this technology is making them very wealthy. We need to incorporate that into our tax policy.
The idea of the Job Guarantee Program is to have the government offer a job opportunity to anyone who is ready, willing, and able to work at a socially established living wage. The program would operate as a buffer stock mechanism for labor. So when the private sector is laying off workers during a recession, we would normally have lots of unemployment. But with the Job Guarantee Program, we would hire those unemployed into a public service program, not the mainline government program, but an additional public service program. In this way, we'll have continuous full employment even during a recession. When the economy starts to boom again, the private sector will be looking for workers to hire, and in this way it will hire workers who are already working in the Job Guarantee Program instead of hiring from a pool of unemployed workers. And for employers, you can imagine that this is even more attractive than the current situation, because you'd rather hire somebody who's employed and therefore employable instead of hiring somebody who's been unemployed possibly for 2 to 3 years with deteriorating work skills and social skills and professional skills. In this way, it's useful for society, it's useful for the private sector, and it provides continuous full employment at decent wages.
I mean, we know that when a young person's been out of work for about a year, not necessarily just in one spell, but a year out of work by the age of sort of 23, 24, they have very damaged employment records afterwards. So they're much more likely to be unemployed again. 5, 10, 15 years later, you still see the same people struggling in the labour market. And when they are working, they have wages which are typically sort of 10 to 15% lower than they would have done if they hadn't had that spell of youth unemployment. And as I say, this goes on well into adulthood. It's not just sort of a difficult transition and then it's all right. It has these what are called scarring effects, which is there's an adverse legacy to being young and unemployed, which damages people's lives for very long periods of time. And as a result, that kind of damage does the economy damage. If you've got people who are out of work more, who are struggling in the labour market, essentially what we find is evidence that people struggle to get those kind of stable career jobs which lead to promotions and experience gains and higher earnings in adult life, which is what most people do as they work their way through jobs and so on. Youth unemployment interrupts that process of sort of gaining skills and experience and promotion, and people never recover fully that period of lost experience and so on.
For society at large, the benefits of a job guarantee program is that it helps to eliminate all the social costs that are associated with mass unemployment. For example, when you have lots of unemployment, there is typically an increase in crime, increase in poverty, economic inequality, socioeconomic exclusion. All of these things would be eliminated or at least reduced significantly with a job guarantee program. So the funding will come from the federal government, but the selection of the projects, the implementation of the projects, the assessment of the outcomes of the projects will be done by the local community with the help of the local population that needs those jobs.
We know, I mean know, right, not opinion, we know that it makes a positive difference to kids' life chances, yeah? And therefore, you know, even if it costs some money, we should be investing in that because it is an investment in the future, just like building roads or, you know. That's how I see it, is that this is an investment, and it's an investment in young people, and it has potentially very long-term payoffs. And if those payoffs are there, though we've never tracked people long enough to kind of prove it, if you know what I mean, then they can pay for themselves, and as well as doing social good.
If we as a society broaden our scope of what's possible in terms of employment opportunities to include the nonprofit sector, to include the local communities as potential employers in the economy, then we can envision a job guarantee program that utilizes the local resources, the unemployed population in the local communities, to provide goods and services that are needed by those communities. And also at the macro level, we can envision a way to completely revamp the direction in which the economy is going, which is currently not really taking care of environmental sustainability in a reasonable way, to completely direct our economic infrastructure for the future in a more economically and environmentally sustainable way, inclusive way, with full employment and price stability simultaneously.
The essence of it is that you should provide in society every individual, every man, every woman, every child, an equal amount, with a lower amount for children perhaps. It should be individual. It should be a right to have a basic income as the essence of living in your society. It should be a national level. It should vary by different countries because the world's living standards vary. It should be paid in cash. It should be a regular amount. It's paid monthly rather than a block sum paid each year. It should be unconditional, and it should be equal for everybody. Over the years, people have said, well, it's unaffordable. Well, it isn't unaffordable. It is very affordable. We give vast amounts of money out through the exchequer, through all governments do it, in subsidies that are spread across society. Vast proportions of national income go in subsidies, most of which do not go to low-income people. They go to the affluent, they go to big corporations and so on, for doing nothing. I mean, they get it as encouragement for doing things. So you can say, well, look, it's affordable. It's a matter of whether you have priorities to give people basic income. Well, everybody should wake up to the fact that a lot of people in this country and every other country get a lot of somethings for nothing. The affluent have inherited wealth. They haven't done a day's work to get that. So you can argue that that is just baldercock, you know. It's just not, it's not right. But it's not a question of giving something for nothing, because what you're doing is you're enabling people to have security in which they can work and be more productive. And I'll come to that in a second. What we found in our experiments, and what psychologists have found in detailed research over the years, is that actually people who have basic security, basic economic security, work more. And when they work, they're more productive than if they were insecure and worried and nervous. So they have more energy, more commitment, and are more likely to work.
In 2011, SEWA, in partnership with UNICEF, launched the Basic Income Pilot Experiment in 9 villages of Madhya Pradesh. The basic income payments were made up to 18 months to study their viability as a tool of social security for the poor.
इसका प्रयोग मतलब शुरू किया हमने, उसको इम्प्लीमेंट किया, इसको बहुत अच्छे से क्योंकि डिज़ाइन किया गया था, बच्चों को भी पैसे दिए गए, यूनिवर्सल रखा। ऐसे गांव चुने जहां पर कि 100 परिवार हो, परिवार के प्रत्येक सदस्य को पैसा दिया गया।
इस योजना के तहत 1 साल तक हर परिवार को कुछ नगद पैसे दिए जाएंगे। परिवार में जो वयस्क है 18 साल से ऊपर जो है उनको 200 रुपए मिलेंगे, 18 साल तक जो बच्चे हैं उनको 100 रुपए मिलेंगे। और ये पैसा जो है आपके बैंक के खाते में जाएगा, लेकिन बैंक का खाता खोलना पड़ेगा। उसीलिए 2 महीने तक आपको हाथों हाथ नगद दिया जाएगा। भाइयों के जो 200 रुपए भाई को मिलेंगे, बहन का 200 रुपए बहन को मिलेंगे, और बच्चों का जो है वो बहन के खाते में जाएंगे। आपको बराबर हर महीना 200 रुपए आपके खाते में आ जाएगा, कोई शर्त नहीं है। आपको परिवार में आपको ही तय करना है।
In order to facilitate these payments, the project staff mediated with bank officials and helped all the villagers to open bank accounts. Within months, all the 6,041 recipients were receiving basic income payments in their bank accounts. Thereafter, to assess the impact of basic income payments and track its progress on about 1,100 households, the baseline survey, interim evaluation survey, final evaluation survey, and a post-final evaluation survey were carried out over a period of 18 months. The results revealed a range of optimistic outcomes, indicating the positive impact of this experiment.
And a good society would be one where you encourage people and give them the space to go through lifelong education, so that we're all learning and all having the capacity to feel adequate security to go off and take more courses, to go off and spend time learning all sorts of things.
The special thing in Switzerland is that the population has the right to be initiative. And that is not only to say what you think, but it becomes political reality. So it's funny, Daniel and me started in 2006 with this idea, 2 people like you both. And then other people comes with us. And it's only a handful of people. And we can collect signatures. And we have had 126,000 signatures. 100,000 is enough to have a people's initiative. And now it's political reality. It's a thing of the whole population to discuss it and to vote about it. I knew a lot of politicians, for example, in the German parliament, who are for an unconditional basic income. And everybody of them told to me, make the movement in the population strong, then we can act. Without a strong movement, without the instruction by the people, we can't act.